This is the initial video help for this application, which is Equipment Service Management Pro version 16. Now we have another application for service that was not current, and the reason we're changing this one, I'm giving the example of this in this overview. Basically, if you look at the app map, which is the navigation map of the application, it's quite similar to the other service app that was written in 2014. But what we've wanted to do since 2014 was address a more practical way to manage information. And in the past, when this application was created, we had several people saying that it was very important for them to consolidate the information for the inventory, which is the equipment inventory, along with the service. What's basically happened is we found that that was not relevant, and it presented some issues that made this application too difficult to use, and we've reorganized it. And now, instead of having the equipment inventory and the service maintenance and all that stuff in there, we've now added it to the information portion of the customer data. This broke up the issues that we were having in the equipment inventory, where you added both parts and materials, and then all of a sudden here you had all the equipment that the client was using all in the same area. What we've done is we've taken the equipment itself and put it back into the individual customer information area, so that when you address the equipment, you're working and servicing the equipment. Then you take the parts and materials and consumables from the inventory and then enter those into the actual data for service in the information side over here. So this is kind of not a very dramatic change, but it was quite difficult to reorganize and yet come back up with a real practical way to manage this. And if we're looking at the application, we're currently in the calendar. We're going to be explaining in this video how and what the calendar is used for. There's a main menu. When you go into the main menu, that's basically where all the video help tutorials are located. So if you click on a video help tutorial, which is located by using any button on the screen where it says video help, it will take you to the video help in the main menu. You would then start the application by creating all of your clients. Once you have your clients included in the application, you can look at the customer listing to see all the clients. Part of what you're doing in the customer listing is you're adding equipment, and we'll go over that when we get to the customer screen. You're adding equipment that is belonging to either a customer or they're part of your own pool where you're also servicing your own equipment. And or what you would do is, if you bought this application just to take care of your own equipment, then it would be the same company files, and it could be different locations where you could have different equipment located in different locations. And or you would have clients where you're actually dispatching your people to go do service on your equipment at their location. The equipment assignment report and all the equipment assignment information is related to the information that you add to each customer. So what's going to happen, you're going to see that particular customer's equipment, and if it's yours, that would be your equipment. If you have other customers and they're not part of your company, then that would be their equipment that you're servicing. This is one of the major changes with the past equipment service management app. It was more of a homegrown kind of a thing where all the equipment that you were servicing was for your own company. And recently, or more recently, we've had people request a better application that could manage both, and that's what this application is doing in version 16. You'd see the scheduled service report, and the service report are these three areas here. And basically what you're doing is you're taking equipment and assigning a schedule plan for scheduled maintenance or unscheduled maintenance, and then putting consumables or reparables in to do the service. And there's also a work order included in this, where you have a work order where you can set up a work order to show your testing and diagnostic. That would be included with an invoice that you would provide to the client, and that invoice would be used for the client to pay the bills that are related to the consumables or reparables and labor that is included when you do service for that company, or even your own company. You can track all of your own expenditures and so forth. There's also a payment process where you do the billing and the payment. You have a payment report for tracking all the outstanding payments, and you can use this as a listing for each client to have a list of their own chargeable invoices and information that was provided to them and was invoiced to them. You'd have a payment portal where you would show all the items that were being paid and how they were paid and if they're still an outstanding balance. You have a company location report, and this is basically for people that are either going to a location for a company, and this provides a map with directions on how to get to each company location. And it also has some of the basic information where relevant locations would be, like a storage parking or a warehouse or whatever it may be. That information would be included in this area. There's a data portal, and we'll go more into that when we're talking about how that is used. It's specifically for a lot of those items and pieces of paper that float around, or graphics or something from a website where you want to have a noted within the customer's information, and then put a data portal out there where you have a graphic or a website or a image of a, say for example, a form or something that you need to have to present to a client or keep on record. Booking UDFs. UDFs are user-defined fields that are included in the information screen. User-defined fields are for fields that we did not include in the application, and there's an infinite number of those you can add to each information record at the top for a customer. And there's also a list view, so you can pick and choose through the ones that have been added and look who they were added for, and you can search on them in the list view in order to find particular information that will help in understanding more about your particular clients and what their needs and usages are based on user-defined fields. Service material portal, that's showing the items that were actually used as far as servicing and doing repair on a invoice, as far as what consumables or whatever were used. List priorities. Now all these lists, as I'll explain, are drop-down lists that are created, and there's several lists in here, and they're colored in this kind of orange, like you'll see list views or lists. And these lists and things that are in orange are supporting information that are used mostly in a search or a find, where you're looking for specific records where there are a lot of records listed and you want to look at just those ones that are relevant to you. Or in the case of a list is a drop-down, that's where you can select the list itself, go to the list and modify it to have the items that you want in that drop-down list throughout the application. So for example, if you're on an iPad or an iPhone and you're using this on the iPad or iPhone, that would give you the ability to edit drop-down lists, where that's not normally something that would be done in an application used on an iPhone or iPad, because you cannot edit drop-down lists. But we've set them up where you can now do edits on any list that is a drop-down list. For example, a list right over here, there's a vendor list, there's a whole bunch of these things that are in here that are in the orange that have a drop-down or a complete list view of all the items that you're looking for. The darker or kind of green army looking things here are main screens, and there aren't that many in the application. This may look like it's a very complex application to use, but it's not. It takes you a very short period of time to acquire the knowledge in order to use this, and of course using the video help is quite obvious. That's where you would start when you're using this application. You would go through and understand all the screens, are the major screens and the supporting screens that are in the application and how they're used. Just like the calendar is kind of its own standalone one where it's colored in blue because there's only one major calendar in this application. The equipment, for example, has its own subscreens, and these are their subscreens. The purchase order has its subscreens. Vendor has its own, expense has its own, and in this case most of these are all related to the client. So you can see there's only about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major areas that you're working in outside the calendar, so there's 7. And it actually is quite easy to learn. Once you get into it, it might make you sit back and think of it before you really get carried away. But as you're working through all these, you'll see that it actually becomes quite easy in a very short period of time. Within the equipment inventory area, the work order is out there, and it's a straightaway work order that can be modified to fit requirements if you have a custom version of this application. Work order portal is the portal for each individual work order, where it has additional information showing the rows from a portal. Work order list view is a list of all the work orders. Work order status is actually a list, drop-down list, where you have status on the actual work order. And the stock serial portal is where you actually manage serial numbered items that are in the inventory as they relate to the individual component. In fact, you'll see that there'll be major assemblies, sub-assemblies, consumables, and other. And basically what that's telling the inventory is how to understand what these items are by using stock serial numbers. The serial numbers also present for each item that is a consumable, repairable, or an assembly. These can be taking the serial numbers, and they can be individually identified when you invoice them out as used items and issued to, say, like a repair. Now, consumables obviously would be billed just as billables, like oils and stuff like that. But if anything has a serial number on it, you're going to want to know the serial number of the one that was removed and the one that was replacing that one that was removed. That's very important if you're trying to do inventory tracking and understand which one went to where and who has it. And is it in a vehicle of your own or one of your customers? Okay, purchase orders. If you find that you need a demand where you have something being ordered or needed to be ordered, the purchase orders are used to go out to your vendors, which is the vendors, and you're going to order from vendors and create a demand on the vendors, and also the demand is coming from your inventory invoices over here. And each inventory record has tracking within it in order to track those items that are being ordered for purchases. And also you go to a purchase order for this, for example, this one here, to actually create a purchase order, which will be reflected in the inventory. And it's what we call a closed loop inventory system. And what that means is that everything that is ordered or used or procured is all balanced back into the inventory, so that you can see the demand when you order it, the received, and the usage back to an invoice, so you know where it was used and how it was used. And of course, with the serial numbers, you're tracking the serial numbers to see which serial number item was used out of the inventory pool for an assembly or a sub-assembly, or even a big part that goes into what particular service that you did. Vendor is pretty straightforward. This is just billing vendors and inventory demand, where you actually create all your vendors that are here, and then they have the pricing and stuff like that that you're tracking as far as vendors that is used in the inventory when you do a purchase or a purchase order. Expenses. These are everything that are not actually billed to a client, and things like, for example, if you're doing mileage and you're tracking mileage, and you're, say, for example, doing something related to an office situation or something that will not be billed to a client but is considered something that needs to be identified back to a overhead cost, is what we would basically say they are. Well, this helps you to work through the expenses. And then you have an employee area within this, where you set up employees for their labor rates, and also the information for tracking when they're supposed to be working, and also an employee portal where you have information about that particular employee. So this is the overview of the actual application and all of the screens that are included in the application. And we're on the calendar screen. I'm just going to basically introduce you to the calendar and give you the reason in this overview why we're using a calendar. The calendar obviously goes day to day to day, or it can be week, month, year, or you can have it in a list view. Why would you use a calendar? Well, this is a complex business where you have a lot of things going on, and you need to have different people be able to track what is going on, when it needs to be done, and so forth. So if I have a drop down like this, these are individual calendars that are created. Each one has its own login. And so, for example, if this is set up for your usage and we put in users, right now it says default user, you can add multiple users where they have their own calendar, and it's their calendar where they schedule their own things. For example, you may have somebody who's a field service guy who's out in the field all the time, and he wants to have a field service calendar for himself just for doing field service. Then you would create that over here in the users, and you would go in in this case, I'm going to pop this back down so you can see it. The users are created in this screen where you add a new user by using the plus, you give it a title, you give it a name, and in this case I am the administrator. You can still add users in this block by using the administrations. And for example, if you have a default user, you can duplicate the user by doing this up here and duplicate, and then take that user and just change the title and everything. And then when you're over here on this side, you can go ahead and it's going to need a username and password when you create the record. If I go in here, for example, and bring it up, there's going to be a username. In this case, it'd be like Mrs. Jones or whatever, so it'd be Mary Jones, and then the login. And then when you go out of the screen, it's going to ask you to put in a password. You can actually have an image of the person here if you want to, and a signature scan if you want to, but that is not really important. If you put in an email, and I don't propose you would do this, this calendar had the ability to do it. If you put in an email, it would actually email them every time they have a change in something on their calendar. Well, what that does is it'll drive them crazy. Their phone will be constantly responding to emails that are coming to them, and I found over the period of time that people don't appreciate that much. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this and go back to the list. I'm going to pull down on the screen so that I get the calendar area back. I'm going to go ahead and say calendar, and now it brings the calendar back up. I'm going to bring it down just a bit more. Okay, so now that we're back in the calendar, each time you go in and log in to a different calendar, for example, if you log in with that username and password, that is the calendar that will be displayed. The administrator is the developer, which would be me, and I would log in if I had to make changes, especially if this was a shared multi-user application on the internet. And a hosted application gives you the ability to have multiple users on this application, and they would have their own usernames and passwords where you add a user in for the default and keep on duplicating it. That way you'd have a list of different users. The additional calendars are things like one just to show deliveries on the calendar. It'd have its own calendar. A dispatcher who is dispatching things, so he has his own calendar to manage dispatches. A manager over all admin person who is managing the entire process and his own calendar. And a move equipment thing where you move an equipment from one location to another. A pickup where you're picking up things to bring them to the service area or service, and then an actual service calendar. Now these are the default ones that are added to the application. You can additionally add more if you need them, specific for the reason that you're using that. And the same thing now, if we're looking here and I click away, I could show all the calendar information here, or me. And when I click on it, it says all. I'm going to go in here and I have the ability to check all the calendars if I'm an administrator or within my own calendar to look for items that are appointments on the calendar here. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the bottom of the calendar is used in the next video help. But in this one, I just wanted to cover, if you have something added in here as an appointment by clicking this plus sign, which we'll come back and talk about, it will show up in the week calendar, in the month calendar, the year calendar, and in the list, which we've already shown you once. So from the standpoint of the way the application works, these are the basic areas and information that are provided within the calendar area where you're working. Now, the calendar itself, some people will say, well, I don't think I'm going to use that. If you attempt to use it and start using it, you're going to find out how good it really works as far as tracking everything that's going on in the application. When we actually come back, and I'm going to do the next video, I'm going to show you how the appointments and the expired appointments work, and how you actually manage the appointments and how they manage the things like setting up service and so forth. It's very important that you know and understand how these work. But let's stop for now, because this is getting very long and lengthy videos. You'll start losing track of where you're actually at in the application. So we're going to stop right here and then move on to the next video for the calendar. So calendar number 2. Thank you.